AMD's DirectX 11 drivers are known to not be the greatest alongside their awesome OpenGL support, but they recently released a preview driver which is meant to improve DirectX 11 performance up to 8% for RDNA 2 GPUs. Obviously, just like everyone else, I wanted to see if it improved the frame rates for the GPUs as well, and so I went and tested painfully a bunch of DirectX 11 games. Every game was run at 1080p max settings and without anti-aliasing, as I usually hate TIA. The test build was an i5 7500, which wasn't really helpful as it bottlenecked the GPU a lot. I also used 8GB of RAM in dual channel. And finally a Vega 56, which is not really usable using the regular drivers. You know, the one I'm trying to benchmark. Unless I use the Pro drivers or Linux. The very frequently black screens, blue screens, that clearly indicate a driver error as the message is thread stuck in the device driver. And it also has hard freezes, like this one. Anyway, the first game I tested was Saints Row the 3rd Remastered. This game behaves weirdly. Sometimes it has an odd FPS cap, and it can just have weird glitches happening graphically. In this case, the frame rate seems to be locked at 120 FPS. The performance wasn't very different between the drivers, and the numbers are all very close to each other, so it very well just could be margin of errors. But using the driver 22.5.1, the average was 107, and the 1% lows were of 20. The preview driver did 109 and 26, and the XVK did 110 and 57. My benchmarking method wasn't the greatest on this game, and the camera angle may have changed slightly between the runs. So while fairly accurate, I could probably try to figure out a better way to do it. Next was GTA 5. This game has a pretty heavy CPU bottleneck, and the GPU sometimes hits as low as 40% usage. The frame rate was pretty much the same between the two drivers, being 124 and 51 for 2251 and 124 average 54.1% for the preview driver. GTA 5 completely refuses to work using the AVK, so I have no benchmark for that. Next is Fortnite. My benchmarking method wasn't very good using that game, so I only did one run for each driver, but the frame rate does seem to be the same for both, being 63 average for both drivers and 37 for 2251. Versus 30 for the preview driver. Rocket League is next, and there was a small difference. 22.5.1 did 195 average, while the preview driver did 205. The 1% were pretty much the same. The XVK was in between the two, besides the 1% which were better. Dead by Daylight had very little difference. 22.5.1 did 108 average and 57.1%. And the preview driver did 110 and 52. I was only able to play one game because the maps are random every time, and replicating gameplay is very hard in this game. Next is Apex Legends. Running a specific path on the shoot extend, the average frame rate was the same, while the 1% lows were better by 3 frames on the preview driver, which is pretty much margin of error, so they are pretty much the same. Next is Hitman 2016. The game was very CPU bottlenecked, with the GPU going at around 30% usage at times. I found a small area that didn't stretch the CPU too much, and ran laps around that. 2251 had 95 FPS average and 45 FPS 1%, while the preview driver did 90 and 41. I thought I may have done something wrong here, but the numbers are actually accurate, so the driver is actually doing worse, while slightly worse, it's pretty much nothing. The XVK did improve the frame rate. The average frame rate was 102, and the 1% was 37, while DirectX 12 did worse than everything, with 91 average and 41.1%. And then finally Shadow the Tomb Raider. 2251 did 65 average and 27.1%. While the preview did 63 and 27. The XVK did 66 FPS average and 34.1%, and DirectX 12 did the best with 77 and 35. The XVK was fairly broken graphically, so it was pretty much unusable, but the benchmark is still there. So, did AMD fix the DirectX 11 drivers? Absolutely not, but this is more or less a step in the right direction. The difference in frame rate was positive most of the time, but very small, and it may in fact just be margin of error. So while most of the benchmarks were accurate and the frame rate was consistent between the runs, the improvement, if there is any, is very small.